Yorkshire topic. It's primarily Roman. I have actually strayed into prehistory and didn't like it and came back again. I ended up at English Heritage with the rather grand title of Head of Research Policy for Roman Archaeology. Then they did away with the Heads of Research Policy posts, not just mine, everybody's. And I then went to, when English Heritage split into English Heritage, as in English Heritage who now look after the castle and Historic England, I went on to Historic England's side and they eventually paid me to go away. Otherwise known as I took voluntary redundancy. And since then, I've been an archaeological consultant working on sites primarily in Yorkshire. I did actually deviate to Dorchester in Dorset. Somebody had to do it. The main projects I've done since I've been a consultant have been the Brooklyn House site in Norton, which was excavated by John Bouglas's company, and I was brought in as project manager to do the publication. And then I've worked with MAP off and on in various ways, mostly through my association initially with the Yorkshire Archaeological Society, Roman section, and I've edited various things for them. And then when I won't say how I got into Eastfield because it's part of a story I was going to tell anyway. But anyway, that's my background. I'm a Romanist. I primarily work on Yorkshire, and I've been doing it possibly for far too long. Anyway, just to make a start, I'm self-employed consultant, Traders Area Archaeology, and I need to make clear from the start, Eastfield is not my site. It is a part of a project that, well, actually, this is the introductory bit to for lectures to people who don't know where Scarborough or Eastfield are. You know where Scarborough is, and you also know where Eastfield is, so we can skip that one. But most of you, all of you, will know that Eastfield is a creation of a post-war period. Eastfield as a town, as it is now, legally, apparently, didn't exist until, I think, the late 1950s. It's either 59 or 57 they started to build it. But now it's expanding massively, as most of you, I'm sure, are aware. The proposals for development are for between 800 and 900 houses. And I'm going to be talking specifically about the area which on the air photograph you can see is labelled HA1. That's what we call the High Eastfield site. The area in the middle here is Deepdale, and HA2 is known as the Middle Deepdale site. MAP have been working on these two sites off and on since 2009 because it's a housing development and they're working in advance of each phase of housing. That's, again, really one for people who don't know the area. But this is where it gets more interesting for you. You can see what is a plot of what was known about the site and what could be discerned by geophysical survey or aerial survey prior to any excavation. What was known about the site was not a lot. There's no records of any archaeological work there, but I think Stephen Gandolfi is somewhere in the audience, and he tells me that the site has been pretty regularly looted by treasure hunters in the past, and that is regrettable, obviously. But in archaeological terms, it was a new discovery as a result of the housing development. And the MAP have done quite a lot of work on this side, but there are still areas to be developed. Hence, there is no publication of that side so far, because, well, it makes sense, they're going to finish the area before they actually do the publication. But the way the housing development has worked is there's two separate developers, a company called Keeble Homes on the eastern side, and a company called Keepmoat on the western side, on the High Eastfield side. And you can see that there are lots of blue lines on... I didn't intend to do that. Go back. Lots of blue lines on the map, and they are geology. They're not archaeology, and that has been a complete pain. That's a good word, pain. I'll stick with pain. Because it actually disguises the what you see in geophysical surveying. And I must say that what you're looking at on this drawing in terms of a plot, particularly in this area, benefits from hindsight. When you know it's there, it's easier to see it. But MAP dug this side, and we'll go through. That's the Middle Deepdale site, little Deepdale running between them, and High Eastfield in early stages of being machine stripped here. And on the Middle Deepdale side, they got Mesolithic flints, some Neolithic features, some Bronze Age barrows, and an Iron Age landscape, which included Middle Iron Age square barrows, of which this is one here. What looks like it's possibly either a bottom of some form of land division, or possibly a very rough trackway, again seemingly of Iron Age date, with an Iron Age crouch burial there. Now, that is archaeology which is worth recording. It's telling us about parts of the Scarborough landscape around Scarborough we didn't know anything about. All well and good. And given the evidence of the geophysics as understood at that point, when they went the other side started on the other side, on the High Eastfield side, they expected to find something broadly similar, but maybe a bit, the geophysics suggested maybe a bit more intensive. But 108 trowel trenches didn't reveal, if you like, the stars of the show. And with all due respect to MAP, they weren't told where to put the trowel trenches. Somebody else, another archaeological consultant, not me, said, this is a layout of trowel trenches we want. It seems like a good sample of a site. And MAP did what they were asked, what they were contracted to do. They're a commercial unit. They're working for a developer. They, although they can obviously make suggestions, they are a subcontractor effectively to the housing development. So that's the possible boundary bank or base of a trackway, hut circle Sorry, apologies. I can see two screens on this. I'm not used to this. So that is a hut circle, which I could see and you couldn't. There we actually, you can see it's ploughed pretty well down to the subsoil. Some features surviving inside, including areas of halves. And then also, not surprisingly, they're boundary ditches, as you get in all Iron Age, Bronze Age landscapes. So far, so good. It's all, as I said, it's all good stuff, but it doesn't really compare with the other side. Now, as we move on to Eastfield, the area I'm going to be primarily talking about is this area, which, as I say, with the benefit of hindsight, there's a lot of features visible in. But when you actually look at that as a grayscale plot, as part of a geophysical survey with no other knowledge, it blends in with the geology, for want of a better way of putting it. And so that's really the view north from Eastfield. The landscape is dominated by Oliver's Mount, which, and I'll come to this later, somebody very unkindly put a motor racing circuit on, but that's really unfortunate, I think, in terms of trying to understand this landscape. But we're dealing with a fairly large area, but the area to the north is also scheduled for development. And so we're actually seeing a rolling programme. The area to the north to date hasn't been started on in terms of development and therefore there's been no archaeology done. Although we can see from the geophysics and the features we've now seen on the ground on the site, there's archaeology running into that area. And this is where it becomes rather fun-like. Now, this is going to be probably one of a few slides where these smaller screens are going to be unfortunate. But can you see a few walls in that area? That is a complex that is the main Eastfield building complex, which we'll look at in more detail. There'll be closer views of. But it is actually something that was unknown. We have major Roman period buildings of which there is no knowledge prior to the machine stripping of the site. The trial trenches, where they actually coincide with any elements of a building, suggest there might be the odd dwarf wall which carried a timber frame over it. We're dealing with something a bit different to that. We're dealing with complex, well-built masonry buildings. Some of the masonry is some of the best I've seen in 40 years' work on Roman Yorkshire. And the core of, and I'm going to look at the site slightly backwards to begin with, in terms I'm going to describe the latest, summarise the latest things, because they're the most obvious. You almost need to take them out of the picture to understand what's beneath them. What we see here is a circular structure with 3 rooms, sort of lobes off the side of it on the north, south and west sides. And this structure is challenging, I think, is probably the politest word I can come up with. And I think you can see what I mean about the quality of the masonry even from this. We actually have on the eastern side, which wasn't so obvious in the other photograph, a porch, suggesting there was an entrance to the east. Well, it's demonstrating there was an entrance to the east. But also, you'll notice we only have soil in the centre of this building, and that is quite interesting when it comes to suggested interpretations. But what you see in a western room is a hypocaust, and the problem with this site is things get reused and they aren't always quite what they seem, I think is one way of putting it. Now, just to go back, we're going to look at the northern room, number 4 here. And what you can see there is a Roman concrete floor, opus signinum, obviously suffered a bit in the last 1600 years or so from frost damage, etc. Also I didn't think I could do that on the pad. Also, it has a post-medieval ditch running through it. But what's equally interesting is you can see it has this bizarre double wall on these 3 sides. Well, what it is a room that is actually of 2 phases. It's been, during its life, extended by the width of those 3 walls. What they haven't done is extend an opus signinum, relay an opus signinum floor and lay it over the earlier phase of walls. But they have built what is a really quite nice piece of masonry, and then, to my mind, in many ways, not finished it. We'll come back to not finishing later on. This is the western lobe with a hypocaust in it. And you can see threshold from the circular room. Nice stone threshold with, there's an element of, believe me, I'm an archaeologist here, but it has a nice, if I could enlarge this, it would be more obvious, stop at the bottom of the threshold to stop the door going into the room when it's closed. But again, we're looking at something which actually is quite nicely built. But there again, the hypocaust pili are built of whatever came to hand. There's lumps of tufa, which we'll come back to later as a stone type on the site, but then basically any bits of stone rubble. But you actually can see there are the below floor passages or vents to allow hot air to circulate. But there's a bit of a problem that having built this hypocaust in this particular room, what they were doing was reusing part of the hypocaust from the earlier structure, which we'll come to later. But the original furnace was over here, but they've decided to put in a new flue here and actually have the furnace in this area. And this is something which you're going to get probably fairly fed up with me saying by the end of this lecture. They never actually fired the furnace. They never installed the furnace. They put the hypocaust in, they put the floor in, but they never actually used it, at least not in this phase. And what they in fact did do was lift all these large stone slabs which they'd used for flooring, fill in the hypocaust and produce a solid floor. So the room was used, but it was not used as it was intended to be used originally. So the hypocaust was never, in this phase, was never fired. And I don't know whether they ran out of money, got bored or what. But we'll see again and again there are these strange changes of intention on the site. That's a close-up of the hypocaust, some hypocaust slabs in situ. And if you look here, you can see a layer of soil between the top of the pili stacks and the slabs. The slabs have been raised, soil's been put in, slabs have been put back down, bedded on soil, including over the pili stacks. And, but just to, if you like, whet your appetite for later, the next slide, they did put in wall flues, but not for this phase. This wall flue, which was in the north wall of the room we've just been looking at, actually originated in the previous phase. Now, the other thing I should have said is the south room there, sorry, excuse me, also had an open signium floor. Now, both the north and the south rooms, like the hypocaust room, were rebuilt. And we've seen that demonstrated very clearly in the northern room. The southern one, we know there is actually a divergence in the wall by the southern corner of the room there, southwestern corner of the room, the divergence is only about that much, and it's impossible to show I don't have good enough, without going into incredibly detailed photographs, I can't demonstrate it in the lecture. Now, that, if you like, cross-shaped building with the circular central room and the lobes lobe rooms on three sides on the porch overlies another room, another building, as we could see when we looked at the area of the hypocaust. First, we're going to look at the southern extremity of that building, this area here. Now, yes, there is. Oh, so I can see it on. Sorry, I assumed it was working. Ah, okay. Well, okay. But it's definitely more obvious than the white arrow. Okay. Sorry about this. I did not know. I don't think I'll quite start again, but I will just shoot back. Right. Circular room. This one is the hypocaust room where they reuse, in part, a hypocaust from an earlier structure. And these are the two rooms, the north and south rooms, which actually have the opus signinum floor. This is the one which clearly is widened, enlarged by a reasonable amount. That one, that is the best view I can show you of the divergence between the two phases of wall when it's rebuilt. You can see what looks like a foundation poking out, but it runs diagonally under the wall. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, no, go forward. No, don't do that. Go forwards. And this is what... Oh, it's only when it works when I'm on the screen, that's good. That is the layer of soil under the slabs, which shows that the slabs have been lifted, relayed, and don't sit directly on the pili, the stone pili. Now, that's the wall flue in the north wall of the building, but as I said, that actually belongs to the previous phase, and there's no heat in that final phase of hypercaust. This is the area we're going to look at next. And moving on, what we've got is something that looks awfully like the business end of a bath suite. We have a furnace room, which initially only extended this far and was presumably open or had a timber west wall, but is extended. But then you have a nice furnace, an area where it would be possible to have a hot plunge bath, and presumably the intention would have been to have a water boiler over the furnace here. And this would have been the caldarium, the hot room of the baths, with the tepidarium here, warm room, with its own little furnace, possibly supplementing heat that was coming through, intended to come through from this direction. But again, we have this slight problem. They didn't actually complete the baths. The space was used. This space was used, and I'll show you how evidence of that later. But further to the east, there was actually what would have been a cold plunge bath, complete with a drainage channel, which didn't drain to anywhere. So again, it's not being used. They've put an awful lot of resources in and produced some beautiful masonry, but effectively wasted the effort. I'll go back a little bit. This area here is actually also really well-built masonry, and it suggests to me that they were bringing in stonework from somewhere else, because had this been completed and they put in the hypercaust floor, the high-quality masonry on which these corners represent would have been out of sight. So they were basically, I don't know whether it was demolishing buildings on the site or they were actually bringing it from elsewhere, but we're seeing something which is definitely demonstrating a massive command of resources, but then a massive disregard for getting any benefit from them, it would seem. And this here is a remnant of a later phase, which I will show you again, hopefully, on a later slide. This is, as I say, the cold plunge bath, as would have been, but we excavated the area here, outside, and there is no ditch, there's no drain, there's no nothing. There is a shallow foundation trench, which was actually this curved wall sits in, but there's nothing to carry water away. Right, and this is the interior of the caldarium. You see all of these fairly nicely finished blocks here. These again are tufa, lightweight limestone, which can be used for barrel vaults over structures such as heated rooms of bathhouses. Anybody who's familiar with pictures of the hunting baths at Leptis Magna, sort of nice vaulted roof. But in Yorkshire, I'd suggest that the nice vaulted roof would probably actually had a gabled roof over it and with tiles, because Yorkshire weather and vaulted roofs probably don't go together too well. In Libya, yes. In Yorkshire, the roof would have failed. It would have succumbed to the elements if it had just been a simple vault. Now, so we have the praefurnium, the furnace room. We have where the furnace ought to have been. We have where the hot bath should have been. We have the caldarium, the hot room, we have the tepidarium, and just off the screen to the right would have been the location of the cold plunger bath. But this structure is an addition to the north-south range, which runs up under the hypercourse room of the building I described first. Now, what we're seeing here is a structure that is probably originating in the 3rd century. And I say probably for a very good reason, not because I and MAP didn't do a good job digging the site, but Historic England decided they wanted to schedule the site and protect it as a scheduled monument, which meant we weren't allowed to take any walls away to get sealed dating evidence, which has actually made interpretation a little more challenging than we might have liked. I think it's probably one way of putting it. But I understand entirely why they did it, because, as I said, the masonry is stunning. And you look at that, which is that buttress, not buttress, corner which I pointed out, and its friend here, in the caldarium, where it comes on, where it meets the hot bath, the location of what would have been the hot bath. It is really good masonry. And as I say, it would also have been completely invisible if they'd ever finished the site in the way that they intended. We know it was that they used the area because there was a hearth over this pit here, and so somebody was actually living in, working in this structure, but it was not functioning as a bath suite. Now, what we have here is a range of buildings running north-south, which I believe I've got photographs of later. But also, what I wanted to come on to was the fact that we actually have a very large site. We're looking at a site here which occupies about 1 hectare. There's a boundary wall running up here. Now I've got a cursor I can show you. And also there's a boundary wall running up here. And we think originally the northern limit of it was there because there is a wall line which more or less goes all the way across what is a small, almost promontory sticking out into the Vale of Pickering. And, excuse me, survival on the site is very much dependent on location, because what we know is that in the medieval period, through to they started building houses, this site was ploughed. And basically the ploughing, we can see the damage done, because you see these buildings here are showed very faintly. That's because, unlike here, where we've got 6-8 courses of masonry, we've often only got the footing course, or indeed the clay base, which the lowest element of a foundation would have sat on. And what they did in the Roman period was create a series of terraces, one of which goes across there. And so these buildings are in the lee of the terrace as the ploughing, if you like, cut away the slope. The buildings at the back of the terrace were getting protected, which is why these survived quite well. I also think these survived quite well because the masonry there was just so much of it. They probably almost raised the plough as they went over it because it was actually too much like hard work. But where you've got the less substantial buildings here, they've been ploughed away. And that means we've got very little in the way of late horizontal stratigraphy. It links the various elements of the site. What we do have are masses of ditches, and I'll come on to those later. But this building here, in a way, illustrates some of the challenges that the site offers. We have 2 phases of buildings there, at least. Within what we have are a series of post holes. You can see there, an excavated one there. But then it's replaced, there's a stone phase built, and it seems it may have been turned into an aisle building at that point. But we have here a mass of stone. We have another mass of stone here. And the building appears either to have collapsed inwards, with the gable end coming down, collapsing into what at this point is an area of soft deposits, because there's a very large pit there underneath it. And similarly here, but there's no pit, and you can see it doesn't survive quite so well. But what you can see is elements of coursing from a wall. Basically, these walls have either collapsed or been pushed in deliberately. And this building is outside, let's go back, outside what we think is the original northern boundary of the site, and we're seeing it extending up the hill. The site extending up the hill, I should say. Now, I talked about the preservation on this part of the site as not being good. Well, that's kind. You can see that the wall line there. Get to this side, and the wall line there is lost completely. But what we do have outside the boundary wall is a trackway, a metal trackway, which actually appears to have its origins in the Iron Age. And it comes up from, under Eastfield town now, but it comes up and turns across the site and and you see odd patches of it, but it runs across the site, basically up generally towards Oliver's Mount. And we believe the origins of this are in the Iron Age, but it's maintained through much of the Roman period. And it seems to be a significant element of the site. I'm not going to say it's the reason the site's there, but I think it may be there because the site is, and I'll explain why later. In the southern part of the site, on what is the southern terrace, we have at least two buildings. You can see one labelled 6 there and a neighbour 7. And they had lots of oven bases in them. That is a 2-metre scale. That is basically almost a 2-metre circle of stone forming the base of an oven with burning underneath. And you can see there are multiple ovens superimposed in this area. And I'll come back to those when we talk about function of the site later. And then we have, the other thing I should mention at this point is that we do have in this area in particular a series of what we're terming long halves, which are only about so wide and normally about that long, but some are actually about 0.5 metre deep. And they suggest there is an industrial craft function on the site. Now, I'm just going to come to this feature here, which is quite fun. It looks like a well. It dug like a well, but we did have a bit of a problem with it. It's rock cut, so it was actually quite easy for us to excavate. It was on emptying it, though, we found that it was going down, and just to prove that we do value our diggers, we did stop when we got that deep, but it was cut into solid rock. It was not going anywhere. And just as a sort of local landmark, Professor Dominic Powsland did all our drone photography for us, which actually is why we have we have a lot of really good aerial views of the site. And just many of you will know Dominic from his work at Heslett and elsewhere. Now, we decided we can't really go down any deeper, so we brought in a coring rig. We got down to 9.5 metres with cores, and we hit solid stone. And there was no way a really pokey mechanical core was going through it. And I suspect that's why the Romans stopped there, because they didn't have a pokey mechanical core, they just had muscle power. But we didn't reach the water table. What we have to remember about this site is it's located on a shoulder of land overlooking the Vale of Pickering. So the water table is down at the level, or maybe not quite that low at Eastfield, but think about Seamakar Starkar. If you really want lots of water, you've got to get down probably 7 to 10 metres to actually guarantee a year-round water supply. So unfortunately, what we were hoping was going to be, and I hate to use the term treasure trove because it actually brings up the wrong, makes people think of gold and silver, but a cornucopia of environmental material. But it's quite clear that it was not waterlogged permanently. It was wet, yes, because it's an area of soil surrounded by stone, and it's where water would have accumulated. But it was not a viable well. And the water supply on the site is an issue. There was another large feature on the western side of the site, which appears to have been a form of cistern, which we think was used for water capture. But in many ways, one of the biggest issues with the site was the fact when it rained, there was too much water, and there are vast numbers of ditches. And those ditches serve many functions, dividing the site up. In the Iron Age, which I'll come on to in a moment, they may have, within the area of site, may have been defining field boundaries or whatever. But I think one of the major purposes of ditch digging on that site was to actually deal with periods of excess water. And, oh yes, I put it out of sequence. These are two sections of the long halves, which have this strange bowl-shaped profile here, and then a flue. But it's only, I say it's a long half, but it's less than 2 metres. And we, at this stage, don't know what these were used for. We sampled them intensively, and I'll come on to sampling again later and talk about interpretation. But there seem to be undertaking some large-scale production using ovens, possibly bread or something like that, and small-scale production of a more industrial craft type. And as yet, we don't know really what was going on. And one thing we do know about is they did produce some pottery on the site. This is the remnants of a pottery kiln, which was built into the side of a ditch. Hence, it's been cut away on this side because the ditch was... there was a ditch there. They cut the pottery kiln into the side of it. When they gave up on using a pottery kiln, they reinstated the ditch, and they, in fact, walled off the pottery kiln. It was very neatly done. And we do have pottery wasters from the site, and we're looking at some pottery production in the 3rd century. Now, moving on to what we found. Well, on one level, we didn't find that much. When you think of what is quite clearly quite a high-status site, it wasn't teeming with the dozens and dozens of boxes of pottery that you get from many Roman sites. Although we did get substantial quantities of brick and tile. Well, we got quite substantial quantities of brick and tile, but again, not the quantity you would expect. But looking at the finds, we do have traces of a Neolithic greenstone axe, which was found in a Roman context. This is a particularly significant find. It's an early, it's mid-1st century Roman amphora at a period when, notionally, Eastfield, Scarborough, and Yorkshire in general was not part of the Roman Empire, but they were receiving high-status material, presumably wine. And we also have a significant quantity of late Iron Age pottery. Only problem is with late Iron Age pottery, as many of you will know, is in terms of a style, it also carries on into Roman period and gets used similar fabrics, at least, even if you really need the form to know what the date is. But we seem to actually have clear evidence of high status late Iron Age occupation focused on this site, which has got a lot of ditches in the Iron Age. That's all we know, because all the ditches, a lot of the ditches run under the area, under and into the area we weren't allowed to dig, because it's been preserved for the Roman buildings which overlie it. I've tended to regard this site as the donut site. We know there's early prehistory, bottom of a donut. We know there's really nice late Roman stuff, top of a donut. And in the middle of a site, we've got a damn great hole, which we don't know about. We know there's occupation going on around it. What we think we have got is continuity, probably from the Iron Age right through the Roman period. That's based on the range of pottery that we're getting in terms of date. The material is there, but in residual context, but we haven't, in most cases, for the 2nd century and the earlier part of the 3rd century, got features which we can definitely say are of that date, because that earlier pottery is being found in residual contexts with other pottery of a later date. So, what else? This rather unprepossessing lump of soil is actually really wonderful. And again, maybe an element with these photographs of, believe me, I'm an archaeologist. But what we've got there is, in this view, a portable hearth, metal grill, 4 legs, and it's the second best ever found in Britain. The best one is in the BM, and I believe it's smaller. So, but they are known on other sites, but normally they're found as fragments. If you've got that bit of it, it would be recognisable for what it was. But obviously iron doesn't survive into big pieces of iron tend to get melted down and reused. But it also had in it a cache of various iron objects, including a scythe and others which we're still waiting to tease out of the X-rays. And so what we seem to have is possibly a deliberate, what they call structured deposit, if you really like, ritual deposit, but it's clearly been placed there, and all this stuff has been put together for a reason. And I mentioned ritual at this point because one of the things that was suggested at one stage, and in part prompted by the idea that there were lots of ovens and were producing lots of bread, maybe it was some form of ritual site which people came to for festivals or whatever, possibly. But the latest buildings don't seem to bear that out. What we do seem to have is something which, up to the 3rd century, could be a high status site. The Iron Age, the late Iron Age, early Roman imports suggesting there's wealth there to begin with. There is an assembly amongst the assemblage from the site. There is Samian pottery, which suggests that there was still resources, wealth in the 2nd century when we can't see the features. But then we hit a snag. What is the date of all? Just let me go back a bit. Sorry, just bear with me. That would do. What is the date of all of these buildings? We know these here are later, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But what we haven't been able to do as yet is actually tie down dates for these structures which are badly damaged. And that is going to be entirely dependent on a detailed analysis of the finds and the samples which were taken. When Historic England said they wanted to schedule the site, they said, okay, the developers are very kindly paying for the excavation, but we will pick up the bill for the analysis of the site and its publication. We are still negotiating with Historic England for that programme. They're committed to doing it, but they keep coming back with questions. And the questions are perfectly valid, but it does mean that as yet we haven't got the results of the processing and analysis of the samples. We've only got preliminary dates for the pottery. We haven't got if you like, the tools to allow us to separate out the different buildings, the ones which lie against this wall. There's a whole range there. That building there, which is essentially represented by the clay at the bottom of the footings, with one tiny bit of stonework in this corner. So we're not in limbo, but we're waiting for information which is going to be absolutely crucial. But to give you some ideas of what the site might or might not be, I'll go on to some suggestions that people have made. We've been very fortunate in that we've had a group of extremely knowledgeable, eminent Romanists, notably Martin Millitz, and John Crichton from Reading, Roger Wilson from Vancouver, Maureen Carroll, who's now at York, who've all generously offered information. And with the best of the world, I'm not sure how much further forward we are. We've got a lot of ideas, but at this stage, we're still trying to process them. We're trying to look for parallels, and the key structure we need to parallel in terms of a late Roman, because we're seeing, well, I didn't actually finish the sequence, did I? After a 2nd century, slightly vague period when we've only got finds, we have the building which has the unfinished bath suite attached to it. That's 3rd century, goes into the 4th century. We can be fairly confident about that. The building over the top, the lobed one, is late Roman, mid-4th century onwards. And various people have made various suggestions. Bryn Walters from the Association for Roman Archaeology has suggested that it could be that building could be paralleled by this structure, which is known as the Capitol, which sits above the villa at Chedworth. And the Capitol, although it's now doesn't survive too well, it was recorded in the 19th century, is thought to be a mausoleum. I have a real problem with the idea of a mausoleum with a hypocaust in it. I'm not entirely certain how that would work. Nice, thanks, Bryn, but I don't think we'll go with that one yet. What we do get, a lot of people saying, oh, well, there are a lobed structure there, or I'll come on to other ones. And this is, that's true, and we'll go on. And we can see a lobe structure. No, I'm looking at the wrong thing. This is very faint, but we've got something similar there. And then we've got this one, which actually looks really good. It's got 2 lobes, circular, and but it's there within that what would be the private apartments of this villa. The way Roman upper class houses and buildings worked is the less important you were, the less you got in. To get through to the back of a building, to the family's private apartments, you'd have to be a social equal, or more than a social equal. So these parallels don't really work. We're looking at a freestanding structure over the previous, what could be a straightforward, intended as a straightforward villa house with a bath suite. It was never finished. But we haven't got any parallels, certainly in the UK, and I think we're really pushing it even in the wider empire, at least as far as we managed to research it so far. The best suggestion, and I still don't think it works entirely, is this one, which is in Portugal at, I can't say it, Abdica Villa. But you can see that this was the late Anthony Beeson who suggested this. And he's got, you've got well, it's not circular, it's hexagonal, but it's got lobes off it, it's got rooms, it works fairly well. for Portugal. However, if you notice, one of the things I pointed out about that circular room was it had earth floors. There's no sign of there having been any drainage of from that floor, and they'd have had to have gone, to drain it, they'd have had to have gone under or through the existing walls, and there was no evidence of that. This is okay in Portugal. You've got an open courtyard garden in the middle of it. I'm not entirely certain that works in Scarborough in December. So we don't know. But my best guess is that we are looking at something which had a roofed central area. A domed roof would be architecturally achievable quite easily, given the resource they appear to be willing to pour into the site at different times. So I think we're still trying to work out what it is. What I think we can be certain it wasn't, and this was a facetious suggestion, I sincerely hope, by one of the people who was working with me on site, looking at High Eastfield Farm, which many of you now know is a construction skills site, suggested it was actually a Roman practice building. They actually had goes at building different things there. I'm not entirely certain that works either. Anyway, what do we know? We've got a complex multi-period landscape. There's, on both sides of the of Deepdale, we have Mesolithic background. We've got Mesolithic flints. There's some Mesolithic, probably Mesolithic features on the Deepdale side, but we have no Mesolithic structures. You don't get Mesolithic structures unless you're down at Starcar or Seamarcar. It's very soggy and they survive. We've got evidence of Neolithic occupation because in the south-eastern corner of our site, we got a group of Neolithic pits, which again, we're still waiting for information on. Because in terms of actually trying to understand what those pits were doing, other than acting as repositories for pottery and flints, the results of the samples will be crucial. On our side of Deepdale, we have no Bronze Age or Early Iron Age features, at least in the areas which we've dug to date. On the other side, there's Middle Iron Age, as I pointed out earlier. We have Late Iron Age and Romano-British settlement on the Deepdale side, but it is a typical ladder settlement. It's what you'd expect in any rural context. We have Late Iron Age at Eastfield, and we have early Roman occupation at Eastfield. We know that from the finds. And the ditches, which we've dated where they run towards the buildings, but we don't know what happens when they get under the buildings. We've got a 3rd century villa house, which, like its bath suite, in places was not entirely finished. There was one room which has a vent through the wall for for a furnace, but there's no hypocaust in it, and no evidence that the furnace was ever built either. But we have this over the top, this later 4th century enigma, this building which there are no parallels for in Britain as a freestanding structure. And indeed, we're struck, other than that site in Portugal, we haven't really got any even close parallels in the wider Roman Empire. So far, we've got plenty of work to do, places to look, things to look at to try and track it down. We don't know the date of the enclosure around the Roman site. It seems likely that it's going to date probably to be contemporary with the, if you like, start with a villa-type occupation, but it could be earlier. We need to date the other Roman buildings, the those which are badly damaged, and we're dependent on the pottery and possibly the samples to help with that. We have the tiniest hints of post-Roman occupation. Both the pottery and the small finds have suggested the possibility of some material which may be 5th century in date. But it's minuscule amount. And after the 5th century, as far as we can tell, it was actually part of a farm, a farming landscape, until they started buildings. And we are, at this stage, still discussing with Historic England the funding for the post-excavation, but they've already paid for the protective backfilling of the core buildings to ensure their preservation. And obviously, we've worked closely with them, with North Yorkshire Council as it is now, and there's lots of people, notably Dominic Pousland and Martin Millett, who have been incredibly helpful with advice. And thank you for your attention.